Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video we got week 13 of our power rankings, another week of power rankings that sees a couple of new teams enter the honorable mentions and a couple of change-ups in the top 10. We'll get to all of that coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the DET Hockey channel. Before we begin this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe below. Thank you all your support whenever to help you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below and don't forget to comment down in the comment section below so you can all discuss in this video. So in today's video, we got another power rankings video to discuss. Week 13 of our power rankings series. We have another week of power rankings to do today. So we're going to, once again, as usual, talk about 4 honorable mentions before we get into our actual top 10 power rankings. There were a lot of interesting ones this week in our 4 honorable mentions. A couple of teams who won 3 games this week and a couple of Eastern teams who are in a wildcard race. So we'll start with who was our 4th honorable mention this week. And just like last week was our 4th honorable mention, we're keeping the Detroit Red Wings at the 4th honorable mention spot. A really good week there for the Red Wings, winning another 3 straight games. Last week we put them in the honorable mentions because they had won 3 straight. We're doing it again this week. They had a fantastic week last week, being the Seattle Kraken, the Chicago Blackhawks, and there was another team in there as well, but 3 impressive wins. They weren't against overly fantastic teams, but I mean, they destroyed Seattle and they were able to beat Chicago quite handedly. They also beat the Ottawa Senators in overtime, so the Ottawa Senators one was impressive, and then they really kicked the crap out of both the Blackhawks and the Kraken. So really impressive wins there from the Red Wings, who are playing phenomenally under new head coach Todd McLellan. Like offensively, Lucas Raymond is on pace to be the first Red Wings player to hit 90 plus points in a long time. Larkin's having a really good season and had a really good week. So is Comfer, so is Casper. Kane had a really good game against the Blackhawks. Like all those guys are doing really well offensively. Defensively, Sider, Edvinsson, Sherratt, they're all doing really good defensively in the net. Lyon, Talbot, Husso, all 3 of them are giving them some solid level goaltending. So another 3-win week for the Red Wings. They are above 500 at 20-18-4. They're in the Hiva playoff race and have them with my 4th honorable mention. My 3rd honorable mention this week is another team, this time a team who's in a playoff spot right now, and that is the Columbus Blue Jackets. The Jackets have had a stellar last couple of weeks, but a really good week this past week, going 3-0-0. They beat the St. Louis Blues. They had another win in there somewhere, and then they also, just like the Detroit Red Wings, kicked the living crap out of the Seattle Kraken. So it was a really good week there for the Jackets, getting a couple of wins. They also beat the Penguins, so win against the arch rival in Pittsburgh and a team who's competing for them for the playoff spot, and then beat a couple of Western teams in Seattle and St. Louis. So a really good week there. Their offense is clicking on all cylinders right now. Marchenko, Voronkov, Monahan before he went down with his injury, a couple of other guys such as Fantilli and Crowley. Like, they're all looking really good offensively. Defensively, Werenski is having himself a Norris caliber season, as well as having good performances from guys like Severson, Provorov, and some of those other younger guys. And in goal, Merzlikins, Tarasov, and even Graves for a little bit have all looked pretty good in net. So Jackets are looking really good. They're locking down the second wildcard spot now, and after a 3-win week I had them as my 3rd honorable mention. My 2nd honorable mention is a team who's now in a top 3 spot in the Atlantic, and that's the Tampa Bay Lightning. The Lightning had a pretty solid week, going 3-0-1. They ended their losing streak last week, then won twice, lost in overtime to the Devils and beat the Pittsburgh Penguins. So they had a couple of interesting wins last week, being Pittsburgh, Carolina, and Boston. So really good win over Boston, narrowly beat Carolina. Like we said, they beat the Penguins, and then had the OT loss against Jersey, but they got 3 out of a possible 4 wins, 7 out of a possible 8 points. They're looking lethal. Offensively, Kucherov, Point, Paul, Hagel, Sorelli, the entire offense is looking really good, even though they don't have too much depth. Defensively, Hedman, Perbix, Chernak, they're all locking it down defensively. In the net, Vasilevsky is still looking phenomenal with Johansson, doing pretty well as their backup. So both had a solid week, locked it down defensively, scored a lot of goals, and got 7 out of possible 8 points. That's why I'm putting them as my 2nd honorable mention. And my 1st honorable mention this week is a team who falls out of the top 10 this week, and that is the Los Angeles Kings. Kings did not have an overly great week last week, going 1-2-0. They wound up beating the Winnipeg Jets in overtime to start out the week. It was a really impressive win there over Winnipeg, but then they went through Alberta and lost both games. First it was to Calgary 2-1, then to Edmonton 1-0. So they were close games, and it was a very slim margin of error, but the Kings did lose both those games. So because of that, I am bumping them. They're still a very fantastic team at the current point, 24-12-5 records. So they're still looking like a very fantastic team, but because of that week and losing to both Alberta teams, I do drop them. Like offensively, offensively definitely slipped up this week, but still, Kempe, Byfield, Kopitar, Fiala, Laferriere, they're all doing really good offensively. Defensively, they actually did quite well this week, only allowing 4 goals in 3 games. So like Gavrikov, Clark, Edmondson, Anderson, all doing really well defensively. And in net, Kemper and Riddick have been looking pretty good. So all in all, Kings are still a pretty solid team. Because of the week that they had, I do drop them out of my top 10 power rankings. So that's the 4 honorable mentions I have for this week. Next, we'll move to my top 10 power rankings here. So the first team I have in my power rankings is a team who did all right and enough to get back into the top 10 power rankings this week, and that's the Florida Panthers. Panthers went as above 500 as you could get, going 1-1-1. They wound up being Utah 4-1, which was an impressive way to start the week. Then they had a narrow OT loss to the hurting Boston Bruins before they had a narrow loss last night to the Philadelphia Flyers. So had a couple of interesting games, a lot of really closely, tightly contested ones, but they did go 1-1-1. Because of that extra point they got, I am bumping them above the Los Angeles Kings, but they're not going any higher than 10th. At current point in time, offensively, that team's still clicking. Reinhardt is clicking on all cylinders right now. On top of that, Barkov, Kachuk, Samoskevich, Louis Duran, and Lundell, they're all looking really good offensively. Defensively, could maybe do a little bit better, but still, Ekblad, Forsling, Mikla are all looking pretty good defensively. And in net, Bobrovsky and Knight still putting in some pretty solid performances. So all in all, a pretty good week from Florida. They went 500, and they're back in my top 10 at the 10th spot. At number 9, we have the 26-15-3 Carolina Hurricanes. A pretty solid week for them, going 2-1-1 this past week. They beat the Vancouver Canucks as well as the Toronto Maple Leafs. They fell in overtime at the hands of the Anaheim Ducks, and they also lost, as we just talked about, to the Tampa Bay Bolts to start off the week. So it wasn't an overly fantastic start to the week for the Carolina Hurricanes, but after that, picked up 5 out of a possible 6 points. It was a really good week there for the Hurricanes, especially being a couple of really legit contenders in Canada, in Toronto and Vancouver. So all in all, you want to see them probably close out that game against Anaheim with a victory, but they aren't able to. So 5 out of a possible 8 points is not too bad. I do drop them a couple spots from last week because of that one regulation loss. There weren't a whole bunch of teams who lost in regulation this week, but I do bump the Carolina Hurricanes down just a couple of spots, but they're still looking lethal. Svechnikov, Aho, Jarvis, Natchez, Martina, Carrier on the forward group are looking fantastic. Defensively, Slavin, Burns, and Orlov are looking great, and in net, Kochekov and Tokarski looking fantastic right now. So all in all, Hurricanes are looking pretty good, and I have them as my 9th team in my power rankings. At the 8th spot in my power rankings is the 27-14-1 Dallas Stars. Stars went 3-1-0 this past week. Started out really well with a come from behind victory in overtime over the New York Rangers. Then they were able to beat the Philadelphia Flyers in impressive fashion. Then they won in a shootout over the Montreal Canadiens 2-1 before in the second half of a back-to-back they lost to the Ottawa Senators. So the Sens do end their winning streak, but they had a fantastic week, winning another 3 games and improving and keeping pace for the top spot in the Central Division. So like I said, solid week for Dallas offensively. Johnston, Duchesne, Ben, Sagan, Bork, they're all looking pretty good offensively. Defensively, Lundqvist, Liabushkin, Heiskanen, Harley, all looking pretty good defensively. And in that, Onger and DeSmith are looking great. So a pretty solid week from Dallas. I had them as my 8th spot, even though I dropped them a couple of spots from last week. At the number 7 spot is the 27-13-3 Edmonton Oilers. Oilers had a very fantastic week last week. Started out with a very fantastic shutout performance over the Boston Bruins. Then they fell behind quickly and wound up losing to the Pittsburgh Penguins before they had a couple of wins over on Saturday and Monday over the Blackhawks and the LA Kings. So a couple of really good performances there. Shut out a couple of teams twice last week, so very impressive performances there, and they're putting up some really good offensive point totals. Like offensively, McDavid, Draisaitl, Nugent Hopkins, Skinner, Arvidsson, all looking really good offensively. Defensively, Bouchard, Ekholm, Nurse, all looking pretty good. And in the net, you have Skinner, who had a couple of really good shell performances this week, and Pickard still looking pretty good. So all in all, pretty good week there from the Oilers. Got 3 wins, and they bumped them up from 10th now to 7th in the power rankings. At the 6th spot in my power rankings is the Toronto Maple Leafs. They did not have an overly fantastic week last week. They went 1-2-0. They opened this week off with a win over the Philadelphia Flyers before they wound up losing to both the Vancouver Canucks and the Carolina Hurricanes. So it wasn't an overly great end to the week, but before that, they were on a 5-game winning streak. So I do bump them down a little bit. I think I had them 4th last week, and now I had them 6th. So it's not a big drop, but the Leafs do drop a little bit. You want to see them get at least a couple of points against the Canucks and the Hurricanes, and getting showed by the Canucks was not overly fantastic either. But pretty good week for the Leafs, and still offensively, Matthews, Nylander, Marner, Tavares, Nyes, Domi, they're all looking really good offensively. Defensively, Riley, McCabe, and Tanev have sort of been locking it down on the defensive end. And in net, you have Woll and Hildeby, who have actually been looking pretty dang good over the past couple of weeks. So all in all, Leafs are still a solid team, and even though they had a losing record this week, I bumped them down to only number 6. My 5th team in the power rankings is the 26-15-4 New Jersey Devils. They had a solid week this past week, only played 2 games, but went 1-0-1, had a narrow overtime loss to the New York Rangers before they beat the Tampa Bay Lightning in overtime on Saturday. So only a couple of games, got 3 of a possible 4 points, which isn't overly bad. An impressive win over Tampa and a narrow loss to a hurting Rangers team. So want to see him probably come away with the victory over the Rangers, but I can't complain too much about this week for the Devils. A pretty solid week, getting 3 of a possible 4 points. They're keeping pace for top spot in the Metro Division, and they bumped them up from a couple of spots last week. I think I had them like 8th or 9th last week. Now they're 5th. So a pretty good week there for the Devils. Like offensively, Jack Hughes, Timo Meier, Andre Palat, Jesper Bratt, they're all looking really good offensively. Defensively, you have Siegenthaler, Hamilton, Luke Hughes, they're all looking good defensively. And in net, Markstrom and Allen continue to look great. So all in all, pretty fantastic performances there from the Devils, getting 3 all possible 4 points and bumped them up to 5th in my power rankings. At 4th in my power rankings this week is the Minnesota Wild. I dropped them down a couple of spots from last week. Not a bad week there from the Wild, but they went 2-2-0. They beat the San Jose Sharks and the St. Louis Blues, so impressive wins, and you expect them to beat those 2 teams, but they did lose in embarrassing fashion to the Avalanche and also lost to the Vegas Golden Knights. So a really bad performance there in those 2 games against 2 really elite level teams. So they're at 500. They get 4 of a possible 8 points, 2 of a possible 4 wins. They're not doing overly bad. It does hurt them a little bit in the standings, and I do push them down a little bit. Not out of the top 5, but still, I do push them down at least a little bit. Like offensively, Boldy, Johansson, Rossi, Zuccarello, all looking really good offensively. Defensively, Brodin, Bogosian, Merrill, Faber, all looking really good. And in net, Gustafsson and Fleury continue to look lethal. So I know they didn't have an overly great week with a couple of bad losses to Colorado and Vegas, but they only went 2-2-0 and dropped them to 4th. My 3rd team in the power rankings is a 29-12-3 Winnipeg Jets, one of 3 teams to have hit 60 points this year. The Jets are looking phenomenal. They had a decent week, bounce back week this week, going 2-0-1. Like we talked about, they had the OT loss to the Los Angeles Kings, but they also had a couple of wins, being the Nashville Predators to end their losing streak to begin the week, and to end the week, a shutout win over the Colorado Avalanche. So 5 out of possible 6 points, getting 3 out of possible 4 against playoff teams like LA and Colorado. Really fantastic performances there from the Jets, who are looking quite good and are back to being a solid team and top in the Central Division. Like offensively, that team's looking fantastic. Connor, Ehlers, Velarde, Niederreiter, they're all looking really good offensively. Defensively, the Melo, Pionk, and the rest of them are all looking sound defensively, and Hellebuck is still being Hellebuck in net, with Comrie putting in some pretty good numbers too. So Jets are locked in defensively, looking pretty good offensively, and I have them as my 3rd team in my power rankings. 2nd team in my power rankings is another 61-point team, the leader of the Pacific Division. That's the 29-11-3 Vegas Golden Knights. The Knights are another team who has looked dominant over the past while, but they didn't have an overly great week this week. They went 2-2-0. They beat the Minnesota Wild, so that's why I put them ahead of the Minnesota Wild after a very fantastic performance beating them. They also beat the San Jose Sharks, but then had an embarrassing loss, getting shut out by New York Islanders, and then also lost to the other New York team and the Rangers 2-1. So it wasn't an overly fantastic performance there against New York teams, but they beat the Sharks like they're supposed to, and they had a pretty impressive win to end the week against Minnesota. So that's why I have them as my 2nd team. Still one of the top teams in the NHL, still at 61 points. So one of the top teams in the West, one of the top teams in the NHL, looking really good offensively. Hurdle, Carlson, Eichel, Stone, Barbashev, all looking really good offensively. Defensively, Hanifin, Theodore, McNabb, all looking pretty good defensively in the net. Hill and some Stoneoff has given them some really solid goaltending. So all in all, a really good week from the Knights, and I have them as my 2nd team. And to duplicate last week, the top team in my power rankings for this week is the same as last week. That's the Capitals. The Washington Capitals had another solid week this past week, going 2-0-1. They wound up beating the Vancouver Canucks to start out the week. Then they had a narrow 0-2 loss to Montreal before they beat the Nashville Predators over on Saturdays. So 3 more points. They extend their point streak. They are looking lethal. Offensively, Ovechkin, who's nearing Gretzky's record, Strome, Mangiapane, Dubois, they're all looking really good offensively. Defensively, Carlson, Trevor Van Riemsdyk, Chychrun, all looking really good defensively in the net. Lindgren and Thompson have been looking phenomenal. So all in all, Caps have solid goaltending, a fantastic decor, an offense that's scoring at elite levels, and they're still the best team in the Eastern Conference and one of the best teams in the league. So that's so I'm keeping them as my number one team in this week's power rankings. So definitely, that's all I'm going to talk for today. I'll let you guys thoughts just to recap. Teams who came in and fell out of my power rankings this week. There were only two teams. The Jackets, who are third honorable mention this week, and the Bolts, who are second honorable mention this week, have joined the power rankings this week. While the Canadiens, who were third in my power rankings last week as an honorable mention, and the Avalanche, who were my second honorable mention last week, both leave. So those are the only two changes we've had from the power rankings over the past couple of weeks. But just to recap, my top 10 teams for this week in the power rankings is number 10, the Florida Panthers, 9 is the Carolina Hurricanes, 8 is the Dallas Stars, 7 is the Edmonton Oilers, 6 is the Toronto Maple Leafs, 5 is the New Jersey Devils, 4 is the Minnesota Wild, 3 is the Winnipeg Jets, 2 is the Vegas Golden Knights, and once again, the first team in the power rankings is the Washington Capitals. Definitely. After you guys thoughts on all of this, down in the comment section below, did they put anyone too high? Did they put anyone too low? And if you had to pick, what would your power rankings be for week 13 in this year's season? So definitely. After you guys thoughts on all of that, down in the comment section below. That's all I'm going to talk for today. We're going to like this video. If you're to subscribe below, thank you all your support. We know to love you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to comment down in the comment section below so all this in this video. Also, a blog, tournament news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. So check that out. We went down in the description below, and can see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.